Hello Merfolk fans, Joe here. Thank you for tuning into my channel today. Right now I'm going to go through a replay of a match where I faced an opponent playing a pretty cool Dredge deck. We can see I lost the die roll. Let's see how the opening hands looked. Well, the opponent drew 5 lands and 2 Vengevines, and for a deck that wants to be extremely aggressive, that's almost certainly a mulligan. On my side, I had 1 land on the draw with a Silvergill to play if we drew into any other land, Dismember to take out a creature. So for me, this is going to be a mulligan. It's pretty close, but it's a mulligan. So the opponent goes down to 6. We can see he gets 0 lands. It's going to be a mull to 5. He decides to keep this hand with 2 lands and his only castable spell as a Lotleth Troll. I'm going to go down to 6. 2 lands, 4 creatures, all of which can be cast off of the lands is very good. I'm going to look at the top card and scry away an island. The opponent opens with a Bloodstained Mire. For my part, I'll play an island and a Cursecatcher. The opponent will crack the Bloodstained Mire, find an Overgrown Tomb, places Blackcleave Cliffs as a second land, and drops a Lotleth Troll. Now with these 3 creatures in his hand, he can discard them all to the Lotleth Troll to make him into a 5/4. It's a pretty big creature. Drawing a Spreading Seas, it's really great against an opponent mulliganing to 5, especially an opponent who doesn't happen to play any blue in his deck. So I'm going to choose to go ahead, play the Cavern of Souls, naming Merfolk, and play the Spreading Seas on his Overgrown Tomb, trying to really limit his access to mana. You can see it takes him off double black for a Bloodghast, though he's probably just going to pitch this guy to Lotleth Troll. The opponent continues drawing creatures that he wants to put in the graveyard anyway. So he attacks with Lotleth Troll, and is going to go ahead and discard a bunch of creatures. Let's see, 2 Vengevines and a Bloodghast, adding 3 counters, making him into a 5/4. For some reason, he chooses to keep the Prized Amalgam in hand now. So, okay, I take 5 damage that turn. The opponent passes, and I draw an AEther Vial. A little bit awkward. A land would have been better there. So after some thought, I decide to attack with the Cursecatcher, do 1 damage to the opponent, and I'm going to follow up with 2 more Cursecatchers just to get as many creatures as I can on the board. If I play a Lord next turn, any of these 3, I'm going to have 6 power in the 3 Cursecatchers. Okay, the opponent continues to hit creatures to make the Lotleth Troll bigger. I have nothing to deal with this big trample creature. Decides to pitch these 2 creatures, brings the Lotleth Troll all the way up to a 7/6, and he does have the black mana up for the second ability here, or third ability I guess, to regenerate the Lotleth Troll. Okay, on my side of the table I draw a Mutavault, and that'll allow me to play my Merrow Reejerey, which I choose to do. Now I chose to pass the turn here. This is getting pretty sketchy. I'm at 8. The opponent has a Lotleth Troll as a 7/6 with Trample and Regenerate. If he top decks any creature, it's going to go up to 8/7, in which case I will have to, well, I have to assume that he drew into a creature with the attack, and if I attacked with the Cursecatchers now, I'd have to chump with the Reejerey. I suppose I could have attacked with 2 of the Cursecatchers. My thought here was that if he top decks anything other than a creature, like a land, he's only hit 2 lands so far, Lotleth Troll will be a 7/6, and I can just try to go all in on blocking him and get him off the table, and then hopefully eventually stabilize. You can see that the opponent drew into another creature. He attacks, waiting to see what my blocks are. Now, I made a slight misstep here. I sort of forgot about the regeneration ability, and I was thinking even if he does pitch a creature, making him into an 8/7, I can just group hug him with all of my creatures. Sure, all of my guys will die, but he's left with no cards in hand, and an island, and the Blackcleave Cliffs, and I could kill his Lotleth Troll, but I forgot about the regeneration, so I'm pretty much screwed here against this 8/7 trample creature. A pretty remarkable game 1. I don't think I've ever lost to a single Lotleth Troll like this. I could have drawn a Harbinger, I could have drawn a Dismember, but as it stands, I'm going to quadruple block and get utterly blown out. All my guys will die. His guy will live. and I draw into another Lord, didn't even hit a land. So I play a Lord, play an Aether Vial, and pass the turn. Opponent draws another creature. Sort of an insane game. I take 6, and opponent passes back. Lord dies, Aether Vial goes up to 1, I finally draw land. But at 2, facing down an 8/7 Trampler with regeneration, I decided that was enough for game 1. So the opponent mulliganed to 5, I mulliganed to 6, and the opponent managed to get there with a single Lotleth Troll. Wild game. For game 2, let's see how the opening hands looked. Okay, this looks very nice on the Merfolk side. We've got 2 lands, including a blue source. Can cast Master of the Pearl Trident, can cast Spreading Seas. We have 2 Aether Vials, which is a little bit clunky, but not terrible at all. The opponent on his side has access to 2 lands, a Lotleth Troll again. Insolent Neonate is a recent addition to these kinds of decks. It's a pretty powerful 1-drop. Not very often are you going to see it just getting into the red zone, attacking for 1. But it can because it has some evasion in the form of Menace. But it does some cool things. It allows him to discard a card, which is something that these decks want to do a lot of the time anyway, like discarding a Vengevine to get him onto the battlefield after playing something like 2 Gravecrawlers or Rotting Rats and a Gravecrawler or something like that. So it allows him to discard and sacrifices this guy to draw a card. Now, you can just take that at face value and draw a card, or instead of drawing a card, you can choose to dredge. Something like a Golgari Grave Troll to get a whole bunch of stuff into your graveyard. So it's a dredge enabler and it's a discard outlet. And it's a creature with evasion. So it's a pretty strong addition to these dredge decks. So this looks like a keep for the opponent. Let's see how the game played out. We both keep. I open with Wanderwine Hub, revealing Master of the Pearl Trident to untap, to bring the Wanderwine Hub in untapped and play the Aether Vial. The opponent drew into a Copperline Gorge, which he plays and casts Insolent Neonate. Okay, for my turn, I untap, put Aether Vial up to 1, draw into a Silvergill Adept, which is great. It's always a wonderful play on turn 2. But in this case, we have a couple choices. Since the opponent was so stuck on lands last game, decide to go ahead and play Spreading Seas here, which will draw me into another Silvergill Adept, and pass the turn. The opponent draws another land, plays out a Swamp rather than any of his other lands because he has a Rotting Rats in hand, forcing both of us to discard something. So my second Aether Vial is good for something after all. The opponent gets into the red zone with the Insolent Neonate. I take 1, go down to 19. Now the opponent discarded a Prized Amalgam, which is a card that will come back to the battlefield from the graveyard. If he casts a creature. Let's just take a second and read this. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard or you cast it from your graveyard, you can return Prized Amalgam. Actually, it says return Prized Amalgam from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. It's interesting that that's not a May ability. I don't know when a May ability there might ever come into play, but you have to. It says return Prized Amalgam from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. So if, for example, he plays a land and a Bloodghast comes back from the graveyard to the battlefield, that satisfies this clause here. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from your graveyard, then at the end step, this guy would come into play tapped as a 3/3. Pretty strong. So on my turn, I put Aether Vial up to 2. I'm going to put Silvergill Adept into play. I'm going to draw an island off of Silvergill Adept, play an island, and play a Merrow Reejerey. At this point, we can see that the opponent has 2 more lands, a Vengevine, a Lotleth Troll, and this Prized Amalgam in the graveyard. Okay, so for the opponent's turn, he draws into another land. Sacrifices Insolent Neonate. And discarded the Vengevine and drew into an Overgrown Tomb. I think at this point, if I recall correctly, the opponent chose to scoop, feeling that he was drawing too many lands. He only has a Lotleth Troll in hand now, which is pretty useless without creatures to discard to it. And I'm really far ahead on the board with an AEther Vial on 2 and 3 lands, and a lot of power facing down the Rotting Rats. The opponent is one of those guys who just plays fast, fast, fast all the time, and I think at this point he decided he'd seen enough. So let's go ahead to game 3, see how the match concluded. Okay, for the opening hands, on my side of things, I've got 4 lands, an AEther Vial, a Harbinger of the Tides, and a Silvergill Adept. Now, 4 lands is usually a little bit too much, but with the AEther Vial, Silvergill Adept to draw cards, Mutavault as an extra creature, and Harbinger, imagine if we had Harbinger in game 1, we could have bounced that Lotless Troll and would have easily won the game. The Lotless Troll would have gone from being like an 8-7 back to being a 2-1. On the opponent's side of things, he's got 2 lands, but only 1 black source. Bloodghast will have to come into play from the graveyard. He's got a Gravecrawler for turn 1, and a bunch of graveyard creatures, so I think this is going to be a keep for both players. While the opponent decided to mulligan that hand, interesting, he actually went down to 5. It was so fast I didn't even get to see the 6. But let's see what he has. Gravecrawler, Faithless Looting, and Vengevine. Okay, so he decides to open with Faithless Looting, discarding Vengevine and a Swamp. For my first turn, I'll play Oboro and AEther Vial. The opponent draws another Vengevine, plays Insolent Neonate, sacrifices him right away, draws Rotting Rats, plays the Gravecrawler, so that was the second creature that he played that turn, and so 2 Vengevines enter from the graveyard. You see that even through a mulligan to 5, the opponent is representing 10 power on turn 2. That's the sort of explosive power that these Dredge decks have access to. So it took me a second to quite understand exactly what had happened. Insolent Neonate and Gravecrawler, being the 2 1-drop creatures he cast this turn, enabled Vengevine to return from the graveyard to the battlefield. And with haste, both of them are attacking. So I take 8. It's a big hit. AEther Vial goes up to 1. I draw another Mutavault. A little bit clunky. I'll play an island, play a Harbinger, bouncing 1 of the Vengevines. You have to slow down this clock. So the Vengevine goes back to the opponent's hand. He draws into a 3rd land, attacks with Gravecrawler and the 2nd Vengevine. I'm going to take it all right now, go down to 6. I'm not quite ready to trade a Harbinger for a Gravecrawler, and I'm certainly not going to chump block the Vengevine. So on my turn, I'm going to put AEther Vial up to 2, and I draw a 2nd Harbinger, which is fantastic because it's going to be great getting the 2nd Vengevine off the table. So I'll start with the Merrow Reejerey and just pass the turn. So I bring in the 2nd Harbinger. I'm going to bounce this Vengevine, and I can block and eat this Gravecrawler. It's possible I should have attacked on my last turn with my 1st Harbinger. I don't know exactly why I did not. Seems like a misstep. The opponent plays a Stomping Grounds, takes 2 damage, and plays out a Rotting Rats. I'll have to discard something, so I'll throw a Wanderwine Hub into the graveyard. Let's see it. Let's take a break for 1 second. So the opponent, let's see, tapped Blackcleave Cliffs toward the end of that turn to put Gravecrawler into play from the graveyard because he now controlled a zombie and was able to cast Gravecrawler from the graveyard because he controlled the zombie. Having cast 2 creatures, a Vengevine came back from the graveyard. So for my turn, I untap, leave AEther Vial on 2, draw a 2nd Silvergill Adept. Gonna cast the first one, revealing the other one, untap an island, draw into a Master of Waves. Gonna put the 2nd Silvergill into play and draw into a Lord. So things are looking up on my side of the table. I'm gonna cast the Lord, untap an island, leaving Mutavault up as a blocker. Attack with 1 of the Harbingers. He is now a 4/4. Happy to trade with the Vengevine if the opponent wants to go that way. Draws into an Overgrown Tomb. plays the second Vengevine, and I think he's just going to do sort of a kamikaze attack here, and probably scoop, because on my side of the table, you can see I have 2 4/4s, 2 3/3s, 2 4/3s. Any of these guys can trade with the Vengevines, and I can get in next turn with the Mutavaults. Lots of attacks. So the opponent goes to attack with all the creatures that he can. Maybe not the Rotting Rats, not sure. Not really important, I don't think. So I'm just going to block the Vengevines with the Silvergills and just trade, and at this point the opponent scoops. I think he realizes I have a lot of power on the table. So the opponent in game 1 won pretty easily on a mulligan to 5 with a single Lotleth Troll. In, I think it was this game, he had 10 power on the board on turn 2 on a mulligan to 5. So it's easy to see the appeal of these Dredge decks. Vengevine is an insanely powerful card when combined with these fast graveyard creatures, sort of like Gravecrawler and Bloodghast, and it's not uncommon at all to see multiple Vengevines as early as turns 2 or 3. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe, leave comments if you have any thoughts to share, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks very much.